Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would give my little fight preview on this, or at least give my little analysis on this, because I keep hearing rumors about Earl, the Truth Spence, and his possible next fight. I've heard rumors that he can fight Manny Pacquiao next. I've heard rumors that maybe he can even, maybe there's even a Canelo fight in store. I've heard that there's just a bunch of rumors. There's just a bunch of rumors that are going around lately. But the one that I tend to believe the most that is going to happen, the one fight that Errol Spence seems to believe that's going to happen next for himself, is going to be the Yordenis Ugas fight. So I thought that I would comment on it. I thought that I would at least give my analysis on the fight. Do I think that it's a good fight? What do I think the chances are of these guys winning? And overall, what's going to happen? So let's get into it. So anyway, first of all, do I think that this is a good fight? Well, obviously, I don't think that it's as good of a fight as, say, a Manny Pacquiao fight or a Terrence Crawford fight. But I don't think that we're going to get either of those fights right now. We're certainly not going to get the Terrence Crawford fight because the Terrence Crawford fight, I think, is just really out of our reach. I think the Terrence Crawford fight probably won't happen unless Terrence Crawford leaves Top Rank. So I'm really hoping this year, once his contract is up with Top Rank, that Terrence Crawford ends up leaving Top Rank. But we'll see what happens with that. So I don't think that that fight's going to happen this year, even though a certain amount of people might predict that it will. But I don't see a lot of people predicting that it will because I think a certain amount of people, just like me, predicted that fight probably ain't happening anytime soon. So we'll see what happens. The Manny Pacquiao fight, that's a fight that could potentially happen this year. I would not be surprised if that fight ended up happening, but I wouldn't be overly surprised if it didn't end up happening. That's a very big fight. I think, to be honest with you, that would be, I think everyone already knows this, but that would be a mega fight. That would be a fight that I would be very interested in. I think everyone would be interested in that fight. And, I hear a certain amount of people alleging that Manny Pacquiao is avoiding an Errol Spence Jr. or that Errol Spence Jr. is avoiding a Manny Pacquiao. I'm not really going to get into that right now because I've not done my thorough research. But what I'll say is this. I think that would be a tremendous fight. I think that would be a tremendous fight because I think both of them offer challenges to each other that could potentially win them the fights. And I think that it's interesting because Manny Pacquiao, even for his age, and even though Errol Spence would be the clear favorite going in, I would say that that's probably a 60-40 fight. And if Manny Pacquiao does show up right, if he shows up the same way that he did in the Keith Thurman fight, there's a very decent possibility that Manny Pacquiao could pull off the upset. Because when I take a look at Errol Spence Jr., his feet sometimes can be a little bit too slow. His head movement is not always necessarily A grade. And the way that Manny Pacquiao is able to move around, even at this age, and the way that he moves at angles and is able to surprise people and catch them off guard, that might actually be a potential bad matchup for Errol Spence Jr. So that's a very interesting matchup. I would actually personally love to see that one. But what about this Yordenis Ugas versus Errol Spence fight? Do I think it's a good fight? I do think it's a good fight. Do I, obviously, once again, do I think it's as good as the Manny Pacquiao or Terrence Crawford fight? No, but I don't think we're going to get those fights this year. We'll have to see what happens. It's not a bad fight for right now. Yordenis Ugas in the welterweight division, at least as of right now, the way that he looks, he's at least going to be looked at least somewhat. He's not as popular as these fighters, but he's at least going to be someone on the level of a Danny Garcia or on the level of a Sean Porter. Now, once again, he doesn't have the popularity of those fighters. But Yordenis Ugas, when we take a look at his skill set, I do think that Yordenis Ugas is a decently skilled fighter. I do think overall that he has very good boxing craft. I think overall that he has good boxing ability. Now, I was watching this Sean Porter podcast. I think actually Sean Porter is a very good commentator. I think that he actually brings up a lot of good points. And one of the points that he was bringing up is that he doesn't believe that Yordenis Ugas has the best feet. And I think what he meant by that is that Yordenis Ugas maybe doesn't have the fastest feet or that he is not the most maneuverable. Because what Yordenis Ugas will try to do a lot of the times is try to sit there and bang with you. He tried to do that with Sean Porter. He did that with Omar Figueroa. Speaking of Omar Figueroa, let's pray for Omar Figueroa because if you've seen that last fight that he was in, if you bought that pay-per-view, or if you didn't, whatever, when it comes down to it, that last fight that Omar Figueroa Jr. was in, he took such an ass whooping in that fight, I believe against Ramos, or whatever that guy's name was. He was actually puking up blood in the corner. I don't think I've ever seen that in a live boxing fight within the past 10 years when it comes down to it. So pray for Omar Figueroa. But when it comes down to it, I remember the Yordenis Ugas versus Omar Figueroa fight. I thought he looked very decently good there. I thought that Ugas actually, to be honest with you, looked decently good in the Sean Porter fight. I thought that actually was a fight that Yordenis Ugas pulled out. I think I scored it about 7 rounds to 5 for Ugas. But when it comes down to it, it was a decent fight. Yordenis Ugas, what I noticed that he does is that he does like to bang with you. He kind of likes to be up close and personal with you. And I just don't know if that's the best way to go here. Now, maybe Errol Spence will try to box on the back foot with Ugas. Maybe he'll decide that Ugas is a little bit too physical for him, maybe a little bit too physically strong, because Ugas, even though Errol Spence can take, a lot of damage, it looks like he has a good chin and has good, what's the word that I'm looking for? Has good, he can take a lot of damage, I guess is the words that I'm looking for. When it comes down to it, even though Errol Spence can take a lot of damage, and can take some hits, I don't know if he'll want to against Ugas. Ugas is a very physically strong fighter. He looks decently big for the welterweight division. He can hurt you to the body. He can hurt you to the head. I've seen him hurt a multitude of opponents. I've seen him hurt Sean Porter a little bit in their fight when it came down to it. So Errol Spence does have to be careful in this fight, especially since Errol Spence does not always have the quickest feet, and especially since Errol Spence does not always have a great head movement. He'll have to be careful. If I had to guess in this fight, I think more than likely Errol Spence is probably going to be on the back foot for this one, potentially. But if Errol Spence were to go in there and try to throw bombs with Ugas, I would not be surprised, because Errol Spence has shown us that he's not afraid to get in a dogfight. So we'll see what happens when it comes down to it. Ugas is a very tricky guy. I think that he's got good boxing ability. He's not necessarily your regular Cuban boxer that you would see like an Anderson Lara or a Guillermo Rigondeaux, or someone that kind of fights on the back foot. Usually, I think that actually would make for more of an interesting fight with Errol Spence Jr. But I believe Errol Spence Jr. would more than likely pull out of this fight. I think he most likely is going to pull out of this fight. I think that Yordenis Ugas is going to try to bang with him more than likely. Now, if he were to be on the back foot, I wouldn't be overtly surprised. But if I had to guess, more than likely, Ugas is probably going to try to go forward with him, which I don't think is the best idea to always do with Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence Jr. can take the best of punches usually. He's shown in the past that he is not afraid to get in dogfights, no matter who it be with, and that he can take a lot of power. He can take certain shots. He's somewhat defensively responsible. Errol Spence Jr., in my opinion, on my pound for pound list, is number 2 pound for pound. And he's not there for just no reason. Errol Spence overall is one of the top fighters in the world. In my opinion, he is the best welterweight in the world right now. He is no joke. So Yordenis Ugas is going to have to watch out. Now, a certain amount of people, if you were to watch this video, Sean Porter's podcast, if you all want to check it out, it's called Sean Porter Breaks Down a Potential Fight Between Errol Spence Jr. and Yordenis Ugas. Go ahead and check that out. Sean Porter, I think, actually has a good podcast on YouTube. But when it comes down to it, some of them predicted that Errol Spence is just going to run him over within 5 rounds. I'm not going to predict that Errol Spence runs him over within 5 rounds. Would I be surprised if there was a stoppage? I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm actually going to say that this one more than likely probably goes to the decision, because I believe, this is just what I personally believe, I believe that Errol Spence Jr. is going to actually be on the back foot, because I think Errol Spence Jr. is going to realize that Yordenis Ugas, if he doesn't realize heading in there, he will, early on, that Yordenis Ugas actually is a very decently strong fighter, and that he can somewhat compete with Errol Spence, maybe just a little bit on the inside. I'm not going to say compete with him completely, because I believe that Errol Spence is going to be better in whatever way they're going to fight, but Errol Spence may not want to make a war out of this one, because Yordenis Ugas, he's a tough cookie. He's a tough guy. It seems like he can even take some damage. He's very powerful. He's got good boxing ability. If I were Errol Spence, I'd probably try to be on the back foot in this fight. Well, we'll see what happens. But if it does end up going into a dogfight, end up going into a war, I just personally can't see Yordenis Ugas winning that one. Personally, in my opinion, I think the best idea for Yordenis Ugas would be to be on the back foot, try to out-jab Errol Spence Jr., go to the body repeatedly with them hooks, and try to hit him with that right cross. I think overall, that's what the best plan in my book would be, but I just don't see Yordenis Ugas doing that. One thing I'll give Yordenis Ugas credit for as well is that he seems to be somewhat defensively responsible. It's not that he can't get hit, but he does seem to put his hands up a decent amount of the time. He does seem to be somewhat defensively responsible. Once again, I've seen him in some pretty big fights, especially that one against Sean Porter that happened a couple of years ago, one where I thought that he clearly won. And a certain amount of people, they always say, well, you got to beat the champion. And a certain amount of people complain that in that fight that Sean Porter did not look like the champion, that overall Yordenis Ugas should have been crowned the champion. And I agree. But it's not really about beating the champion. It's about beating the A side. It's about beating the A side and the person who's usually more popular. And that's why whenever you have a very closely contested fight, even the fighter that you thought should have won, a lot of the times they don't receive the decisions because they're not the A side. They don't have the popularity on their side because the people who are more popular are worth more money. And boxing at the end of the day is a business. It is a money sport. So it is what it is. That's why, you've seen so many crooked decisions, but it is what it is. Anyway, when it comes down to the overall, bottom line is this. I think that this is a very interesting fight. I don't think that it's as good as the Manny Pacquiao or Terrence Crawford fight, obviously. But I don't think that we're going to see at least the Terrence Crawford fight anytime soon this year. Manny Pacquiao could potentially happen a little bit later on. But it seems like an Errol Spence versus Yordenis Ugas fight is going to happen eventually. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's my little breakdown on this. I think it's a decent fight. Probably would be on pay-per-view. Yordenis Ugas, in my opinion, he's probably going to be up there with a Sean Porter or Danny Garcia when you talk about credibility with an opponent because he has very decent boxing ability. He's got good power. He's a tough opponent. So I don't think that he's necessarily going to run through Ugas the way that some people predict. Do I think that Errol Spence will win this fight comfortably? I think more than likely he would, but we'll have to see what happens. Anyways, that's really about it for my little breakdown. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.